the 15-year-old young man who was killed by the Calumet City Police. And so we'll be setting up that story and kind of connecting that struggle here this evening. And then our closing speaker will be Ms. Erica Gordon-Taylor, who's the cousin of Emmett Till, and she'll be kind of bringing in that history and drawing the connections to now and talking about why it is that we still have to fight what it is we are fighting. So again, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We'll also be joined in the discussion section by Ms. LaWanda Lampkins, who is not only a police torture survivor herself, but had her son taken from her by the Calumet City Police as well. And so we can get that going in discussion. So what it's going to look like, we'll have presentations for about 10 minutes from each of the speakers, and then we'll move into an open forum type discussion where people can raise comments, their own experiences, and maybe just connect some of the other activist work that they may be involved in. Because I see a lot of folks in red today, so I know that we might be hearing from some folks from the teacher struggle. So again, I'll go ahead and kick things off. And that way we'll have ample time to hear from the floor during discussion. Okay, so the public forum topic tonight is a very clear one. Jail the Killer Cops in the New Jim Crow. And based on that title, I see that it has some traction in the community as we're joined by so many people this evening. There exists a very important and complex discussion around what it is that we fight and how we go about fighting it. And I'm going to be drawing on lessons from past mass movements in my talk. And my introductory comments will serve to address these questions as well as set up a historical context for why we fight and hopefully lead to further questions of your own that we can take up during discussion. My talk is going to specifically address institutionalized racism, police terror, educational apartheid, and mass incarceration. First, it is necessary to set up what it is when we say the new Jim Crow. What does that mean? It's a very bold statement, and some folks have some kind of, maybe misconceptions about it or might think it's too harsh. And we're going to say, no, it's not, and set up why exactly that is. So looking back historically at its roots for the new Jim Crow, coming out of the Jim Crow era, and then examining the origins of racism in this country is going to kind of set up this historical context for this talk. Now, racism is a particular form of oppression. It stems from a discrimination against a group of people based on the idea that some inherited characteristics, such as skin color, makes them inferior to their oppressors. Yet the concepts of race and racism are modern inventions. They arose and became part of a dominant ideology of society in the context of the African slave trade at the dawn of capitalism in the 1500s and 1600s. American planters and soon-to-be slave owners saw the profit that could be made off of keeping an enslaved workforce permanently. After establishing that African slaves would cultivate major cash crops of the North American colonies, planters then moved to establish the institutions and ideas that would uphold white supremacy. Most unfree labor became black labor because blacks became cheaper bought than white immigrant servants. And the laws and ideas intended to underscore the subhuman status of black folks in this country, in a word, the ideology of racism and white supremacy, emerged full-blown over the next generation. Now, the institution of chattel slavery was so much the foundation of American society that it took a bloody 600,000+ dead civil war to uproot it. Now, the war may have ended what we considered chattel slavery, but it certainly did not end racism. We had abolition, but now what? The challenge of uprooting racism, the challenge of uprooting racism was the goal of a Reconstruction period that was set up. This period ultimately failed, however, and in the end gave rise to the Jim Crow era. Now, Jim Crow is what we classically understand as enforced poll taxes, grandfather clauses, all-white juries, segregation of public space, KKK rallies sponsored by the very towns they wreaked havoc upon, etc. Now, in the mid-20th century, fight back arose, demanding integration, equal opportunities for employment, fair and equal pay, and access to quality education. The civil rights movement dealt a tremendous blow to the legal manifestations of Jim Crow racism and the civil rights movement, as it is often talked about. However, its roots aren't, and that's something that I want to focus on tonight, because I think that it establishes how we can actually build a fighting movement. The groundwork laid for the civil rights movement can be traced back to the work of integrated, radical, progressive organizations in the Depression era that challenged the platitudes of the Jim Crow South, as well as the de jure racism that was felt in the rest of the country. So organizations such as the African Blood Brotherhood, the American Communist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, and Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, though these organizations flawed in many ways, all organized around the principle that the institutions of this country were literally built on the backs of black folks and the poor. And as such, these institutions were inherently racist and anti-poor. They maintained, these groups, that these institutions could not be reformed, but rather they must be toppled, they must be destroyed. And it was this perspective that enabled these organizations to be the most effective and lay that essential groundwork that we know for the civil rights movement. Now, this systematic and institutionalized racism that we've been talking about from a historical perspective lives on in our society today, propagated by profit motives, and it can be especially seen within the cruel era that we call the New Jim Crow. The prison industrial complex, police terror, educational apartheid, all of these things continue to disproportionately affect poor people, and poor people of color in particular. Michelle Alexander, author of The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, has this to say: "The clock has been turned back on racial progress in America, though scarcely anyone seems to notice. All eyes are fixed on people like Barack Obama and Oprah Winfrey, who have defied the odds and achieved great power, wealth, and fame." Now, Alexander points out that masses of working class and poor folks in America, and African Americans in particular, are being relegated to a status of a racial caste, although the official approach to dealing with minority communities has been redesigned to avoid explicit use of racial attributes. According to Alexander, the forms of racial control evolve as required by the changing political periods and contemporary standards within the current criminal justice policies, replacing the Jim Crow laws, which in turn had replaced slavery. The old and new Jim Crow systems originated under parallel political and social circumstances, in both cases following major liberating upheavals, the Civil War and Civil Rights Movement respectively. The white ruling class was able to forestall any economic and other reforms by redirecting anger and hostility of vulnerable and very bias-inclined white lower classes away from themselves, the rich ruling class, and the system that served the interests of the privileged toward an easy-to-identify, separate, and already scapegoated racial minority. Michelle Alexander highlights several components that make up the new Jim Crow, and it's important to take time to examine these and see how they intersect to form an incredibly insidious web of disenfranchisement. But because we have some limited time, I'm going to focus specifically on police terror, mass incarceration, and educational apartheid. So to focus specifically on police terrorism, in her latest piece, journalist Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor writes for Socialist Worker, "Police operate in black and brown communities as if the Bill of Rights does not exist, randomly stopping people for no reason, conducting searches without consent, and arresting and holding people with no charges. It is also infuriating because they operate without impunity. It is next to impossible to have a dirty cop charged with a crime or even disciplined for illegal or unethical behavior because the cops police themselves." Now, I'm of the opinion, and so is this organization, that we cannot afford to shy away from terms like police terrorism. We need to call it what it is. When we hear the stories and daily incidents of bigoted violence that so many of our brothers and sisters of color experience at the hands of police, to not call it terrorism is to ignore a brutal reality that we actually have to actively confront and fight. When on average, every 40 hours, a person of color is shot and murdered by the police in this country, using any other word than terror would actually pale in comparison and do a disservice to identifying what it is we must fight. Now, Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor continues saying, police terror may be a permanent feature of a system that is as economically unequal and unjust as this one, but that does not mean that we shouldn't make demands for police accountability and beyond. Our growing movement should demand an immediate end to the legalized racial profiling of stop and frisk programs in New York City and everywhere else variations of it are used. We should call for federal investigations of local police murder and brutality cases because we know that the police can't police themselves. We should demand elected and accountable police review boards that can independently investigate police crimes. And we should demand an end to laws that criminalize the filming and audio recording of police, as these are often the only means to capture any proof of their crimes. And this is why we say and call this forum Jail the Killer Cops, because it's exactly about demanding accountability and not conceding to impunity. Now, I want to take some time to address mass incarceration. Mass incarceration is a direct result of police terror that we've been talking about. Harsh sentencing and draconian drug laws that all come dripping from head to foot with racism. The unrelenting racial inequality, which has created what Michelle Alexander considers a new caste system, is hidden from view, almost invisible as a caste due to the media-condoned maze of rationalizations for it. By mass incarceration, what Michelle Alexander is saying is that the criminal justice system, together with a larger web of laws, rules, policies, and customs, racial stigmatization, and permanent marginalization, serves as a gateway. The members of this new undercaste, once released from prison, face a hidden underworld of legalized discrimination and permanent social exclusion. Now, we can talk about the root causes of poverty and crime, and is it any wonder that there's crime in areas that have been systematically disenfranchised? When you look at communities that have been stripped of their mental health facilities, like when we talk about 63rd and Woodlawn, there was a movement that was actually built around that. When communities lose their mental health facilities, when communities lose any kind of social resources, whether that be, temp job fairs, whether that be actual, like schools that are invested in and aren't military academies, whether that look like, after-school programs for kids and the creation of jobs and betterment programs for those communities. Any way you slice it, when you take resources out of a community, you inject crime. You inject that kind of potentiality. And so it's important, as Michelle Alexander is kind of laying out what mass incarceration looks like, to see where that comes from and to see where crime comes from, and by extension, how poverty directly links up with crime. Now, the war on drugs alone has had a devastating impact on African American communities on a disproportionate scale with the actual dimensions of criminal activity that take place within those communities. In less than 3 decades, the U.S. prison population exploded from just 300,000 to over 2.4 million, with the majority of the convictions coming from drug offenses and nonviolent offenses. Now, this is resulting in the world's highest incarceration rate, which is ironically exceeding the rates of a number of regimes in other countries that are strongly criticized by the U.S. government as highly repressive of their people. Now, the number of folks incarcerated right now is higher than the number of enslaved men in 1850. To add insult to injury, many of these mega prisons are even built on former plantation land in the South. And prisoners are expected to work for pennies on the dollar, if for anything at all, producing household goods that end up on Walmart shelves, Target shelves, etc. The prison industrial complex is truly reimagined slave labor, a slave labor for profit scenario, where poor whites and poor people of color must labor to turn a profit for the states, but mainly now companies that run these barbaric places. And this, I think, flows right into a discussion on educational apartheid. When we can see what violent and devastating roles that segregation play here in Chicago, the struggle around education that is being bravely fought by teachers and workers, specifically in the CTU, but also supporters, it really has exposed the racist and anti-poor agenda of the rich and powerful who control the City Council and the Board of Education here in Chicago. Now, these folks, for them, the agenda is very simple. They want to break the back of public education, they want to bust a union, and they want to expedite the disenfranchisement of countless working class and poor communities here in our city. Now, schools in predominantly black and brown neighborhoods are always the first slated for budget cuts. They are always the first for turnarounds into charter schools and military academies. Those schools are much more heavily policed by the Chicago Police Department than by CPS hired security officers. There's a correlative there. The classes, there are never enough caseworkers, the classes are always overcrowded, and the buildings themselves fall into disrepair from lack of funding. It is no mistake that this happens to these communities. The school-to-prison pipeline is a harsh reality for the majority of these schools, where a zero-tolerance policy can dictate the future of young children and young adults. These policies ensure that a bad record stays with these kids permanently. Not one of us who have been in these communities or live there believes the line from Rahm Emanuel or his administration that all of these students in CPS have an equal shot at education, right? That's, I don't think we buy that. The CTU has consistently brought up these and other issues about their working conditions and an equitable vision for schools that Chicago students actually deserve, and they continually bring to light these kinds of harsh realities that we actually have to take a stand against. Now, we saw a groundswell of activity around cases like Oscar Grant, Troy Davis, and Trayvon Martin. People were pouring into the streets to make their outrage known at these cases. And though these demonstrations have peaked and quelled, I think the best way to put it is a righteous anger was felt that mobilized thousands of people. And a feeling like that, a sentiment like that, never really goes away. It always kind of just stays boiling right under the surface. And across the U.S., communities are organizing marches, vigils, demonstrations, and organizing meetings just like this one to speak out against police violence and murder against African Americans and Latinos in their communities. At the center of much of this organizing are the family members themselves who we'll be hearing from, who are the victims of police murder, who are bravely and actually very heroically finding one another across the country and joining forces to demand justice and speak out against this racist terrorism. The outpouring of protest and organizing in response to the lynching of Trayvon Martin showed the potential for a movement against police brutality, murder, and corruption, and how vast that movement can be. New groups are forming every day, and we actually need to build a fighting movement, and one that draws from these lessons of radical abolitionists and radical organizers of the past, from the civil rights movement to the Black Power movement, etc. And if you feel this sense of outrage at what you're hearing about what is happening to our brothers and sisters, we want you to join an organization that is committed to an anti-racist struggle, a struggle to end police terror, and more broadly, a struggle to end the new Jim Crow. And we will start here in Chicago, but this is a movement that we recognize must grow and move past just our activities, right? But we have to start connecting these issues to existing fights here in Chicago. We have to continue to amplify the voices of family members and empower communities. This isn't going to be something that somebody can swoop in and fix for us. This is something that we have to stand up and fix ourselves and demand an end to it. And I think that we are capable as a people to do that. And I think that that's what, in part, this meeting is talking about tonight. What we can actually do to demand accountability and not impunity from the police. And I know folks will be sharing their stories, and then from the floor as well. So thank you again, everyone, for coming out. And we'll kick it off now with Mark Clements.
Hello, and thank you for being invited to speak among you. What I notice in this room are a bunch of younger people, especially in this section. Many of you may or may not know of John Burge. Do you? Very important history. One of the reasons why our Chicago public schools should be on strike is due to the fact, guess what? They ain't got no history books. John Burge's tortures occurred from 1972 until 1993 in Chicago. If that's not long enough to be printed in a history book, what's wrong? It's called hiding the knowledge so that, in other words, you would think what occurred to you was new. It's not new. Me being someone 16 years old, picked up by Chicago police, you know, to me, color didn't matter. But come to find out that to them, color did matter. Because in their eyesight, myself as well as many others, and we're talking about up there, many other individuals fell victim to John Burge. A lot of people say, well, torture, what did they do? Well, guess what? If I give you those two little testicles and I put them between your legs and I squeeze them, would you sign a confession or would you make a confession? You'll do both. The bottom line of it is that our criminal justice system is corrupt. It's corrupt, and it starts from the corruption with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Guess what? We are the people, but we act like we're not. We got to get up and make some noise. You lose if you don't make no noise. What's that old saying? A shut mouth can't get fed? Well, you know, it's all shut, close, or whatever. Silence amounts to nothing. And you don't receive the justice that you should as a people. This shouldn't be no color thing. I'm a little darker than you. But in the eyes of racism, it's a problem. We are the problem, first of all, because we keep voting in the wrong people. We act like we cannot produce our own people to become to be something. We can't. Prisons are the most abusive environment that you will ever experience. Prison. Many people say, well, guess what? Little Timmy went to prison. He stole some 9-laters. He got caught. He did his time. Now he out. Now why he come out acting like an animal? If that's what I teach you, that's what you're going to become. We need to educate ourselves. Anita Alvarez is one individual that is protected by a bunch of cronies. You know what a crony is? A fake. So she's protected by them. She's in the middle, and she's protected by them. We are the individuals that sit around and we say, well, guess what? I think I need to go take little Timmy out to the baseball game today. Or I think I need to go to the park and hang out. Or I need to go to this party. No. If we come against these people one time like the teachers union did, we have to show outrage. But if we come one time, you think criminal justice reform won't start to occur? Yes. State's attorneys are voted into office with less than 3,000 votes. That's because people don't vote for them. Crooked judges. Think about that. But to give you a little history of myself, I was sentenced to 4 natural life sentences. That means I'm supposed to be dead in prison. Never allowed back into society. 16 years old. This is a society that is so racist and so hard in his heart where it says, guess what? Kids who are accused of their first offense, let's boom, lock them up, and guess what? They'll never amount to anything. Now, if I was to start with each and every one of you in this room, because you all did something wrong, and I was to say, guess what? I'm the judge. Lock them all up and never let them out. That's what the system thinks of your children. That's what they think of your brother. That's what they think of your sister. Because guess what? You got 2 legs and won't exercise them right. And I'm not saying everybody in this room is not doing that. But we need to come together. If we don't come together, we lose. Why in the world the Watts family, the Boyd family, matter of fact, even the Emmett Till family. Think about that. I think this been 50 years or so, or whatever, still ain't got justice.
57 years, 2 weeks.
Think about that. So that means black codes are still in existence. Anyone know about your history? Black codes, they were slave laws. And every one of us in this room is under black codes. You may say, well, yeah, I'm Caucasian. No, you're not. Not to the system. Because you mingle with them, they say you must be them. Think about that. So in other words, the fight is among ourselves. We fighting each other. And the true fight should be focused upon the crookedest individual that Chicago allowed to get into office, Rahm Emanuel. The man got $18 million, but y'all think, or whoever voted for, think he's going to be a great mayor. Duh. Did you ever read history to learn what dictatorship is? It's power and money. So now we got rid of Mayor Richard Daley. Everybody say, oh man, no one can be worse than Richard Daley. Well, we getting ready to experience some stuff. And you gonna get to crying. No, you ain't experiencing nothing yet, brother. When we tell you, you gonna get to physically crying. Because when we tell you, if you hungry, guess what? You gonna steal. You are gonna steal. Everybody in here, I can take all your food and just leave you up in here, and I can put the food over here in this corner. Somebody gonna go in that corner and they gonna steal that food. But when someone else, like an Anthony Porter, and look that name up, Anthony Porter, especially young people, look that name up. Anthony Porter served, 17 years in prison, came within hours of being executed. Now because he come out and he got a drug problem, hell, he should have more than a drug problem. Everybody said, well, hey, why he can't get his life together? Think about that. That psychological torture right here. All of you women and all of you brothers in this room, one day you're going to have children. This is your education. This is your time to form a group where that if it happens to your child, you have someone to run to, because if you run to the mainstream people, trust me, have you ever heard of without the grease? That's the way they're going to make you feel. So let's learn. Let's take this knowledge, put it under our belt, mobilize together. I'm talking about mobilize together. Because when we tell you, when people have events and whatnot, many of you are free. Let me see you on the protest line. And let's go after Anita Alvarez. Let's go after Rahm Emanuel. And let's break down these chain cycles that is affecting our brothers and sisters inside of these prisons. Believe it or not, right now they suffering in somebody's prison cell. Thank you. My name is Mark Clinton.
would you care to address folks now and share your story?
Yeah. After that,
I don't really.
I went first. I'm Renee Watts. I am
Oh, hold on a second.
I'm answering the bell.
Sorry. We've got the boot camp coming downstairs, folks. Sorry.
I'm Renee Watts. I am the sister of Stefan Watts, who was killed February 1st of this year by the Calumet City Police. I'm not usually the public speaker of the family. I'm usually the person behind the scenes doing stuff. So this will be one of my first times publicly speaking about it. So I apologize. I'm not as impactful as my my co-partner here. So just to give you like a little bit of a background on the situation, Stefan was diagnosed with Asperger's, which is a form of autism. He was diagnosed with that around the age of 9. So we caught it extremely late, even though we went to several different people, several different therapists, several different doctors, from Larrabee Hospital to Children's Memorial to Loyola to UIC, every other doctor, and we finally got a diagnosis when he was about 9, which is, if anyone knows about autism, it's a very late time to catch something like that. A child with autism needs structure, and they need certain care, and when you're about 9 years old and you're finding that out, it can be very, very traumatic, especially for the family members involved. I feel that my family is a family that play by the rules. You tell us to do X, Y, and Z, and that's what we're going to do. We're not going to break laws. We're not going to break the rules. We're going to follow what the doctor tells us to do. We'll follow what the police tell us to do, and everything will be fine. So his therapist and everyone that has taken care of him, except for us, of course, have told us that in order for him to be transported to a mental facility for the times when he has outbursts or acts out, with people with Asperger's sometimes do. If something changes in their life, sometimes they have that issue, and they have to be transported to a mental facility. In order for Stefan to be transported to a mental facility, we have to call the police because he has to arrive by ambulance. We can't simply call the fire department. We can't simply call the hospital. We have to have him brought in by police. That is a Cook County thing, and that is underneath our insurance, and that is what we are. That's what we have to do. In places like the Plains, you don't have to do that. You call the mental facility, they dispatch somebody, so that way the child can come safely. Well, in Calumet City, you have to call the police. The police were very aware of Stefan's condition, and every other time the police came, they came with a hostage negotiator usually. Because usually he will barricade himself into a certain part of the house, or he will run outside of the house to kind of get away from them because he's scared. He's been tased by the police, he's been jumped by the police, he's had several asthma attacks by the police, so of course he's a very, very afraid and scared child. That was the first time that my father ever called the police. My father is recovering from stomach cancer that has come back since all of this has happened, and he wanted Stefan to go to school. This is the son. He went through summer. He went through winter break without school, and now we're breaking that rotation, and now he has to go back to school, so he's angry. I mean, he's a child. He's 15 years old. He's going through puberty. He's angry. So the police were called for him to go to the mental facility. When they arrived, Stefan had calmed down. Stefan said, "Oh, I'm going to school. I'm going to school. I'm fine. I'm going to go to school." Well, at this time, he was in the basement of our house. The police were upstairs. You can hear all the conversations because they're right above him. And my father said, "Okay, if you guys insist on coming in, because I'm telling you not to, if you guys insist on coming in because you have to make sure he's okay, I only need one of you to come downstairs." So 6 police officers arrived. 6 police officers went to the basement. They went to the basement. My little brother was coming around the corner, and that's when, by the police accounts, that they said that he had a knife. My father said that he had a butter knife, and he lunged at the police officer. The first police officer shot him, and then he was hit. He moved a little bit. He got up. The second police officer shot him and killed him instantly. This all happened in front of my father, so it's not like it was like, oh, it's a he say, she say, or you weren't there, or things of that nature. After that incident, they moved everybody out of the house. Everyone had to leave. My mother was upstairs sleeping. She didn't even know what happened. she woke up and she realizes that her son was just killed, and that big boom that she just heard downstairs was her son. Kind of moving forward through all of that, some of the things that we tried to do was, I mean, you would assume somebody kills a child, that person should go to jail. When the gentleman shot up the movie theater for Batman, he killed several people. He's in jail. He's not dead. He's in jail. The police officers didn't shoot and kill him. He is in jail. This was a 15-year-old child, and you shot and killed him twice, and you're not in jail. That doesn't make sense, right? So again, a family of rules, even though you totally messed us up and you totally don't trust you. But again, we're like, we're not going to trust you, we're going to trust the people above you. The people above you are going to put you in jail. Well, that didn't happen. They came out and said, the state police said that they were not going to arrest the police officers. From there, we've gone from Anita Alvarez, as that name has always been thrown around. We've been trying to get some type of recourse for it. All they tell us is that they're investigating. Investigating could mean it's on my desk and I don't really care. I'm waiting for you to stop asking me about it. But we continue to call and we continue to try to get in front of them so that they can do that. On the other side, things that we can control are our laws, and things that we can't control is how the police officers are actually trained. If police officers are not trained properly to deal with someone of a mental disability, then how can we trust them to take care of us? If they don't know how to behave with us, how can we expect them to get us someplace safely? So some things that my family is working on is we want an initiative of getting the police officers trained. Right now we're working with several state representatives of Illinois and other states that are interested in getting their police officers trained. Other police officers that we know who are police officers in our family, we have military in our family, we have from all across the world. Everyone wants this. Like, police officers have come up to us and said, I do not want to be involved in something like this. You know, all it takes is like a few bad apples for everyone to get a terrible name. They don't want to be involved in it, they want to have the training. They don't want this to happen to them. So that's what we, as a people, are trying to get them. And then, let's see, and then the next thing would be is, I cannot remember, I'm sorry, I cannot remember the name of the insurance, but it is a very common insurance for low-income families, for children. It is Medicare, sorry. How can I forget that? Okay. But getting that policy changed where the child does not have to be brought in by ambulance by the police, that you can actually call the mental facility, and that mental facility will dispatch someone out so safely they can be removed from the house. Because usually you go to schools, and I volunteered at my little brother's school after everything happened, and a lot of children do get out of hand, and they're big. You can't really do much with them, but you have to use certain calming techniques so that way you can calm them down. If our teachers can do it, if our teachers, and his teacher was like 4 feet tall, if she can do it, then how come, 6 police officers can't do it? So those are the 2 things that we're working on as a family and, with the rest of the group to get passed. Get that? Oh, and sorry, that's part of the Stephon Watts law. And the Stephon Watts law is to work against that and make sure that police officers are adequately trained. And we do have it on the back table if you want to sign it. And that's all. It wasn't as impactful. Sorry.
For sharing with us. We're going to have Erica Gordon-Taylor now kind of draw the meeting to a close before we move into the discussion section of the forum. And again, Erica is a social justice activist as well as a cousin of Emmett Till, who's been fighting for, their family's been fighting for over 57 years now. So, Erica, will you share that story with us?
Good evening, everybody. First of all, Renee, that was very impactful. Just your story alone and what happened was very impactful. Working with the National Alliance of Parents Against Police Violence has afforded me the opportunity to be in the company of many families across the nation who have suffered tragedies such as this one at the hands of racial profiling and at the hands of the police. I am a cousin of Emmett Till. I was raised in the home with his mother, grandmother, and his stepfather. My mother was 8 when Emmett was murdered, and she lived in the building where there was a family building over on St. Lawrence in Chicago at the time when Emmett was murdered. In fact, she could hear the cries from his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, on the 2nd floor, and they lived in the basement floor when the calls came in that they had found Emmett's body and that he was indeed dead. My voice tonight echoes the voice of Mamie's. My personal ideologies were developed while growing up surrounded by the strength of my family and being around Emmett's mother, Mamie Till Mobley, traveling with her, listening to her many lectures, witnessing her embrace families and loved ones who had suffered loss similar to her, such as, I don't know how many people in here know the story of Ben Wilson, who was murdered in the 80s. I watched her embrace his mother in the living room, and they wept together. You know, she would join forces and build alliances with victims who had lost their children as well. Just as I continue her legacy and I join forces with victims who have suffered loss at the hands of police, victims whose children have been murdered in Chicago due to gun violence, etc. Emmett Till was murdered at the age of 14 in Mississippi for whistling at a white woman. An all-white male jury deliberated for all of little over an hour to render a not guilty verdict. A few months later, J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant sold their stories to Look magazine. And an article entitled The Shocking Story of Approved Killings in Mississippi, in which they detailed how they beat Emmett with a gun, shot him in the head, mutilated his body, and threw him in the Tallahatchie River with a heavy cotton gin fan tied around his neck. A little boy fishing saw his foot, and it just so happens it was at the mouth of the Tallahatchie and the Black Bayou rivers that connected. And it just so happens that his body was caught on a twig. I don't think that was by chance. I think that was ordained by God, that his body was discovered for a greater purpose. They were compensated about $4,000 for sharing that story with Look magazine. They were protected by the law of double jeopardy. Once acquitted, a defendant may not be retried for the same offense. We have advanced from the shocking story of approved killings in Mississippi to approved killings in America. Dick Gregory stated animals have more rights in America than black people because there are restrictions on when and how you can kill them, but it's always open season on us. When Emmett Till was murdered, his mother Mamie said, "Leave the casket open. I want the world to see what they did to my boy." She wanted them to see what he looked like. And she stated that the image that you all see in the magazines and on the web, if racism had a face, that is what racism would look like. He represented the face of racism. Racism yet exists today. It's always been in our existence and evolves over time just as we do. One might say that lynchings from the past, such as that suffered by Emmett, have manifested as modern-day lynchings through mass incarcerations, racial profiling, and police terrorism, just to name a few. Officers of the law without moral convictions are simply hiding behind their badges instead of hiding under white hoods. Police officers across the country interpreting the laws for their own immoral practices have become what I call the modern-day KKK. Emmett Till's murder was a result of racism, but victims such as Rekia Boyd, Alan Bluford, Stephon Watts, Howard Morgan, Darren Hanna, James Rivera, Ramarley Graham, Amadou Diallo, and Trayvon Martin, along with Sean Bell, they're the real victims of racial profiling, amongst many others of this war. We mustn't forget them. They are the true victims. They are the catalyst for a new civil rights movement. Today, parents who suffered loss are angry. Their anger has ignited this move of action. They want answers and they need answers. You can't murder someone's child and toss the file in the solved crimes pile while officers go back to work as usual the next day eating donuts and drinking coffee. We are not a disposable race. We won't stand by and allow this to happen. That is why it is of utmost importance to continue rallying, protesting, and drawing attention to this epidemic. Racial profiling threatens to undermine the very fabric of American society. It provides a means through which racism is allowed to continue in this country. If you oppose the past Jim Crow laws, then you should definitely oppose the new Jim Crow laws that are strategically established today to enforce control similar to that in the 50s when my cousin Emmett Till was murdered. This control is in the form of programs like Stop and Frisk in New York and Stand Your Ground in Florida. There is an awakening happening in America, a modern-day movement. Michelle Alexander, author of The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration and Colorblindness, stated during a recent interview that she feels the most important thing we can do as a nation to combat disenfranchisement laws is consciousness raising and truth telling. I think as a nation we have been lulled to sleep to imagine that we have made great racial progress, that we're on the road to the promised land, when in fact we've taken a tragic wrong turn. We may have taken a wrong turn, but to me it's just a detour. An awakening is occurring, arousing the consciousness of our communities by unveiling the truth surrounding the unjust murders of our loved ones. It's mandatory. Just as Emmett's image aroused the nation to fight for their civil liberties, exposure of the truth about victims of racial profiling is arousing a movement, causing us to join together in solidarity to create the noise needed to stir change. Public pressure in the form of petitions, rallies, and marches can profoundly impact the outcomes of our fights. If we sit back and allow injustices to happen without fighting for our rights, then we are as guilty as those who commit the crimes. A 16-year-old murder by police in California, James Rivera Jr.'s family, was finally given the police report recently surrounding their son's death after 2 years. An article recently published in The Socialist Worker by Jeffrey Boyette, Whitewashing Police, read, if it wasn't for the relentless public pressure organized by the family and their supporters, including weekly personal appeals to the city by Rivera's mother, Dion Smith Downs, it was unlikely the report would ever have been produced. Emmett Till's mother was accused of being used by the Communist Party to further their causes in America. She was also accused of using Emmett's death as a means to making a living. There were ongoing efforts to discredit Mamie and Emmett's characters. The police use the same lame tactics today and try to discredit the victims of this war. Don't forget the intrepid decision by Mamie Till Mobley, the godmother of the civil rights movement, the nucleus, the often overlooked and under-talked about warrior who continued the struggle for civil rights and war against human wrongs. She turned her tragedy into triumph, just as the parents who have been victimized by racial profiling and have suffered loss of their children are accomplishing through their struggles and fights for justice. Whenever Mamie heard of a mother who had lost their child to random acts of violence, she could identify with their pain and offer emotional support. And I know she will be standing by their sides today, grieving with each one, in solidarity, strengthening the bond between them as mothers and as parents, making and building an alliance, making strides towards justice. I just wanted to say that I noticed that they're selling the book in the back by Michelle Alexander. And we've been reading the book online, doing a teleconference to better understand the new Jim Crow. I think it's imperative that everybody reads that book. I was speaking about the new Jim Crow, but it awakened me. I learned so much more about the new Jim Crow by reading that book. Our last teleconference on the book is next Wednesday. So if anyone is reading it, has read it, or just wants to join in, you can get that information today. But I stand in solidarity with my colleagues here on the panel, and thank you for giving me a voice this evening.
Thank you again, Monica, and thanks to all of our panelists for sharing your stories and coming out and speaking tonight. We really appreciate it. I want to go ahead and draw some folks' attention to the literature table that's going to be at the back before we kick it off into discussion. We have books, we have newsletters, we have pamphlets, we have petitions, we have sign-up sheets. If you're looking for a way to get plugged in, we are perfectly capable of helping you do that, and we really want to make that happen. There's also some folks who will be, talking probably about participating in some CTU picket lines, participating in actions around the city. There's specifically a flyer on the back table that we're building for, that our group's building for on September 22nd, which is going to be an action in Calumet City, joining together the families. The Watts family of Stefan Watts, and then also of Ms. Luana Lampkins, whose son Prince was killed in Calumet City as well. And so giving voice to those families and helping to kind of build a visible movement in that community that says, we have not forgotten, we're not going away, and we're still demanding our justice. So the information for that event is at the literature table as well. Just so folks have ample time to participate in discussion, I'm going to keep a stack so that folks can make their voices heard. And since we're such a large crowd, I'm probably going to ask that folks keep their comments to 2 or 3 minutes. I'll tap on the table when we need you to wrap up, and that's not to silence anybody, but rather that's to ensure that we can have a broad participation from folks. So if you hear me tap on the table, I'm not disagreeing or don't want you to keep going on and sharing, but I just want to keep folks, keep the discussion flowing. And when we near the end, I'll call for last round of hands before we wrap up to mingle, get literature, and talk to one another. So we'll go ahead and kick it off. Daphne, did I see your hand?
Yeah.
Did you? Okay. Do you want to go ahead and open things up for the discussion?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I may swear a little bit off of why we are here, but it is related. One thing that we think we need to address in discussing that we have to start and be various organizers is the violence within the Black community and how it has swarmed and swelled over the last few months, and that's the Black on Black crime, and however you want to do it, and how this actually does relate to the same oppression and the same things that are going on, and to understand that we have to go forward. And as one of the groups that are really addressing just terror violence within the Black community, we have to also pay attention to this. It can't be ignored and a blind eye turned from it, because we have to also understand how it dislodges and goes all together and come together. So while we are planning and organizing police brutality, police torture, and things like that, we have to also come together and address the violence that's also taking young Black men away from here. And addressing these things, like I said, it all goes together because they are out here. There are no resources. The same women that are being released from jail after all this incarceration, you get out, as Mark said, there's no jobs for them, there are no resources, no education, there are limitations on everything. A drug conviction, you can't get a Pell Grant. Things like that. So it's supposed to be rehabilitation. So what are they to do? Like I said, as Mark said, if you have a family to feed, and no one's going to hire you, and the bottom line and the plain truth that's out here that these young men are faced with is left with nothing but hustling, this might be more than connection. And that's the only alternative, which is known, and this is known by this system. Because none of these young men plant Cocoa plants. None of them manufacture weapons. Bullets aren't made inside of their basement homes and inside their apartments and bathrooms. What needs to happen, because like I said, it all goes together, and you cannot get rid of one without getting rid of the other one. Because the only way we're going to fight the police violence and the police torture is if the community comes together and these young men understand to stop putting themselves in a position to allow the police to justify one false move, and the system justifies the police killing these young men. So until they're educated and understand why they should not, and what exactly is going on, and that the system is against them alone, it's part of the Jim Crow. It is part of it. This was foretold and it was said, it was part of the plan. If we can't get rid of them, let them get rid of themselves.
Right.
It's all systemic to this system and how it works. It's about profit. Racism and profit, and it all goes hand in hand. So while we are addressing this, we have to address the violence in our communities amongst our black men. It's terrible. These are children. These are teenagers. Somebody should be watching Ninja Turtles or something, but they're out here with guns. Real live weapons. And this is no joke. They're in school with guns. They're gang banging in rap music. This is what's popularized because the only thing that we have to start attacking the media, we have to attack everyone. They polarize this. All this is put out there because it's intended. And it has to be understood that this is intended for the annihilation of the black male race, to keep them oppressed and down. And that's the whole point about it. We can no longer overshadow it, cover it up with proper words, proper etiquette, political correctness. We have to tell it like it is and what it really is, because that's the only way it's going to be understood. We cannot continue to put things. We have to go into the communities, talk to the individuals that are there. If we're going to make true action, action has to be upon, because we all know what's happening, but they don't know what's happening. And me personally, I do a lot of this, and I'm tired of preaching to the choir. Because we all know the business, and if we are going to do this, if anyone's really going to do this, it's about getting out amongst the people, not being afraid. Why do you think these young men act this way? Because we go out scared of them. But in reality, guess what? They're scared of us. I speak to young men. I spoke to a young man who has never been in downtown Chicago. He's about 20 years old. Never been on the west side, north side, not out of his community. That's a shame. You know why? Because they're afraid. The very people that are afraid of them, they are afraid of, because you know why? They look, especially, and when they see anyone white, they feel that you automatically look down on them. They're born into nothing. From birth told they will be nothing. And these are things that have to be addressed along with everything else. It has to be done. And we're at a point now, talking this is not going to do it. We got to start walking. Because talking is over. We've heard it all. Everybody knows the story. Everybody knows it all. Everybody knows the problem. We're always putting down solutions. Now it's time to put those solutions and put it into action and decide what are we going to do, because we're at the time now. Bodies are falling. These young lives are falling, and you don't see them all that are on the news. Bullets are still, even if they don't die, they're being paralyzed, incapacitated for life. Now they're disabled. Never have a work history. Parents don't have insurance. Nothing happening. So now what? These things have to be looked at on every level possible. Generated every level possible. If it's going to be done, and it's going to take us to do it. The system's not going to do it. Rom's not going to do it. The city of Chicago isn't going to do it. If it's not us, no one's going to do it. We have to do it. It's up to us.
Probably the most profound kickoff to a discussion session I've been a part of. Both of you, Daphne, thank you. We're just joined. I'm going to ask the floor if folks would mind allowing a few extra minutes to our next speaker. Ms. Luana Lampkins just joined us. She's somebody who fights with our organization and actively organizes with us. She herself is a survivor of police torture and will be sharing the story of her son Prince. And I would ask that if folks are able to allocate a few more minutes for her to share that story, just signify by shaking yes. Okay. Ms. Lampkins, come on up here. Yeah, come on up here.
Hi, thank you. Excuse me, everybody. I really apologize for being late. And I really thank you for being here. My name is Luana Lampkins. I spent 30 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit that I'm still fighting for justice for. And I would like to bring awareness to the women that are wrongfully convicted, or convicted under circumstances where they're not getting equal treatment as men get in the same similar situations. But prior to my being released 2 years before I came home, the police murdered my oldest son, Prince Alim Akbar. That was January 4th, 2010. And I'm in the process now of legally, presenting a lawsuit Luana Lankins versus Cardenas Liz. So we only have 10 minutes. I really wanted my son because the 30 years that I was